All, thank you very much for joining me today. This is the second in the series of the Saturday evening webinars which I plan to take on thesis writing. So one of the things for those people who did not join in the previous session, I want to say is that this is focused only on thesis writing. Though many of the points may be common when you write a paper or you want to submit a manuscript for a journal, but my focus here is on thesis writing, and I hope it will be helpful for both the residents who are writing, whether it is MDMS or DMMCH thesis, or whether it is for the guides who are helping residents write their thesis for the first time. So this is a kind of what shall I say, some thoughts which I like to share, because I know sometimes how difficult it is. And so this is the second lecture. So today I'm going to cover two major aspects. One is going to be how to write the review of literature, and the second talk is going to be on how to present the results. Both are slightly larger lectures, quite amount of with a lot of what shall I say, content laden lectures. I have tried to simplify it as much as possible, and so we may go after 7 o'clock also. And so if you have something else to do and you want to log out after 7 o'clock, it's perfectly fine, because I couldn't manage to keep it within 1 hour. So let's see how it goes. So I'm going to start sharing my screen for the first one, which is going to be review of literature. How to write the review of literature. Can you see my slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to talk about how to write the review of literature in a thesis. Now, as I said, writing the thesis is a daunting task for PGs, because there are so many things which they have to make sure is written, kept in the proper convention, the format, and they are always looking to finally getting the thesis, whether it is you are doing MD or DMMCH. But it is the duty of the guide to make it look easy. Okay, it is not that all that easy, but we need to make sure that it looks easy. So today, the first talk on review of literature. What I'm going to tell you is what is review of literature, what is the need for us to review literature, what are the structure and elements of this part, how to write it, and more importantly, how not to write it, what to avoid, some style tips which I would like to give, and then I would conclude. Now, one of the things are we tend to confuse review of literature with literature search. Both are entirely different. I'm sure all of you know. Review of literature is what you write in the thesis. And to write the review of literature, you have to do a literature search. So what is a review of literature? It is a critical analysis. Generally, what we do is we look at review of literature as a mere description of whatever we have searched. It is not that. You collect data or collect data on the problem you are working with, and you have to critically analyze that and give the relationship between the body of knowledge which exists in the field and how this relates to your problem or what you are working on. So this is what a review of literature is. One, it is critical analysis, and the relationship between the body of knowledge which is already known, which exists in the field, and how this relates to your topic. So this is what is meant by a review of literature. Okay. Usually this is the longest part of the thesis. So a lot of effort goes into writing this. So you may ask, what is the need to review literature? First is, it establishes the importance of your topic. So if you say so many people have worked on it, from that time to now, so much of work has come. Recently, so many new things have come up. So the importance of your topic is established. and whatever background information to understand the study is. Again, we know that you understand, and as a resident or student, you know what you are talking about. Literally, you know what you're talking about. Also, this allows you to justify your research question. So, because when you do a review of literature only, you will find out what the gaps are. So, your research question, the conceptual framework, methodology, everything stems out of the review of literature which you have written. It also allows you to show the examiners you are familiar and up to date with the topic. After all, the idea of doing a thesis, of expecting residents to do a thesis, is to make sure they know or they are able to study one topic in depth. So that allows you to show that. And then also that you establish that your study is just a link in the chain of developing knowledge in the field. So this is the reason why we need to review literature. So right, now I'll come to what is the structure and what are the elements. So the structure of the review of literature is also an inverted triangle, just the way I described last time about the introduction. And I said that, it is an inverted triangle or funneling down, whatever you want to call it. This is also the very same. It has three basic elements, and each element is further organized into themes and subthemes. So if you look at the structure, you start with the broad context, then you talk about the related issues, and then you go on to the researchable problem. So these are the elements: broad context, related issues, researchable problems. This is how you frame your review of literature. But don't think that the shape signifies the length. It doesn't mean broad context means you write more, related issues a little less, and researchable problem is less. It's not like that. It's just that we are trying to tell you what the shape of the review of literature is. It doesn't, translate into the length of the element, each element. So look at that title which I have given: Effectiveness of modified prescription slips in reducing prescribing errors. This could well be one of the titles of any thesis. So if you look at this, what is the broad context? The broad context will be medication safety or medication errors. That will be the broad context. The related issues will be factors responsible for prescribing errors. That will be the related issues. And the researchable problem will be tools to reduce prescribing errors, isn't it? So when you look at the title, you get a feel of what will be the broad context. Here you are talking of using some kind of prescription slips in order to reduce prescribing errors. So the broad context is medication safety or medication errors. And then if you want to look at related issues, it will be what are the factors which are responsible for this. And the problem is what tools can be used to reduce prescribing errors. So this is the way you structure your review of literature. Now it doesn't end there. Each theme, for each of this thing, you need to write some themes and sub-themes. So if it is medication safety, under medication safety, you will have certain themes and sub-themes. Under factors responsible for this, you will have certain themes and sub-themes. And I'll describe what it is. So the same title, we are sitting with the broad context. So I said medication errors will be the broad context. So you can write about the definition. What are the types of medication errors? What is the burden of medication errors? How many people die or near misses and things like that. What are prescribing errors? What is the definition? What is the burden? And so on. So under medication errors, you have various themes. You may have some sub-themes behind this also. If we are looking at related issues, I said related issues are usually the factors responsible for prescribing errors. So you can talk about individual factors, human factors. And under that, under this theme of individual human factors, you will have many sub-themes. You can list what the factors are, you can describe them, you can write about the etiology and etiopathogenesis, you can write about the epidemiology and so on. Similarly, the system factors, you can list and you can describe. So this is what I meant, that under each head, you will have themes and you will have sub-themes. Now, when you're talking of the researchable problem, okay, in this we said that the tools to reduce prescribing errors would be the researchable problem, which we want to focus on. So it could be on prescription format. You will have types, effectiveness in different settings, what are the lacunae identified, logistic difficulties. Under prescription format, do you have electronic tools, the types? Then under each type, you can list the types here. Then under each type, you can write a little bit and so on. So this is what is meant by themes. These are 3.1 and 3.2 are themes, and these are the sub-themes. So this is how you plan your review of literature, okay? Now, so that goes on. So you can still write more on this last part of it, the researchable problem. You can have educational programs, guidelines, so on and so forth. So the thing is, this is a template, but the most important thing is this template must be planned. And this is what is almost never done when a guide instructs the review of literature to the student. So this template has to be planned beforehand. These themes and sub-themes have to be planned. And in order to plan it, you should have done a thorough literature search. You should have downloaded literature. You should have read it. Both the guide and the student should have read it. And then you plan this. So this template must be planned. This is the most important part of today's lecture, which is a take-home message. So let's try another example. Now that this is there, let me try another example. So this is the next topic I'm giving. Implementation of surgical safety checklist in a tertiary care teaching hospital. So this could very well be one of the thesis topics. So here, what is the broad context? Broad context again will be surgical safety. Related issues, what are the methods to improve surgical safety? Researchable problem will be what are the issues in implementation. So this is, so under this you are going to write, okay? So you might ask, for each surgical safety, again, you will have themes, you will have sub-themes. For related issues, you will have themes, you'll have sub-themes and so on. So this is how you will try to plan a template for review of literature. Now, you might ask me, is there any other method? There is one other method, and this is the method which I use actually, and I generally tell my residents to follow this method. First is I ask them to write down the title. So whichever is your thesis, you ask them to write down the title of the thesis. From the thesis, I ask them to write 3 or 4 major headings or related keywords. So take some words of the thesis or some related keywords, and under each of these major headings, I ask them to again list another 3 or 4 subheadings, and under each, then I ask them to arrange it in a logical order and write about 250 to 300 words for each subheading. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but to me it is a little more simpler than the other method. That is what I personally feel. But you need to plan the order in a manner which makes sense to you. So let me give you this thing. If you look at the last one which we took, implementation of surgical safety checklist in a tertiary care teaching hospital. Now this is the title. We have written down the title. If you need to list 3 or 4 major headings or related keywords from this, it would automatically be surgical safety. It would be checklist, improving surgical safety, implementation of tools. It could be anything. You might write something different, but these would be the major takeaway from this heading. Okay. So for each of these headings, this is what I said. So write down the title. This is the title. List 3 or 4 major headings or related keywords. These are the major headings of keywords. Under each heading is 3 or 4 subheadings. So for surgical safety, I will have some other subheadings. What is surgical safety? Is surgical morbidity a problem? What are types of harm? How do you prevent them? What is the burden of harm to a patient undergoing surgery? Any studies to characterize it in a teaching hospital? Are there any studies in India? So these are all thoughts which will come to you when you are talking of surgical safety. So you make them into your subheadings. Okay. So look at this title. This is another thesis title, Effect of Neoadjuvant Chemotherapy on Coagulation Profile of Patients with Breast Cancer. So again, if you are doing this type of thing, we have written down the title. Now, major 3 or 4 headings or related keywords. I'm sure all of you will definitely take neoadjuvant chemotherapy. That's the third and fourth word. You'll select that. You will select breast cancer. Obviously, it will be a major subheading. Coagulation, that is already there. And then naturally, because you're trying to correlate drugs which are used in neoadjuvant chemotherapy with coagulation. So what are the effect of the drugs which are used for neoadjuvant chemotherapy on coagulation? So these are the 4 major themes which will come out. Now I said you need to arrange them in a logical order, isn't it? So obviously you will not want to start with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. You will want to start with breast cancer. So you will start your review of literature with breast cancer, then talk about neoadjuvant chemotherapy, then perhaps coagulation, and then how the drugs which are used for that affects coagulation, or it could be the other way also. Okay. So what happens is when we start this thesis process, generally, whenever we have huge tasks, we tend to procrastinate. So this is what happens. So you actually writing your thesis will take very little time, but doing all these other things, changing the font and formatting and thinking about it takes up more of your time. So then let me tell you how not to write the review of literature. What generally people do is they just say what other researchers have found without emphasizing what it means to your study. Because as I said, it is just not to review, but it is to critically review what other people have said. So you just summarizing what other researchers have found without emphasizing what it means to your study is not a correct way of this thing. Most of the time when we read thesis, we find Brown et al. Investigated this thing. Charles et al. Studied the effect of this. Desai et al. Conducted a study. This is the kind of sentences we find, and simply what they have found is stated. The second thing is people do, the mistake they do is they start right from the very beginning of what happened and then they go on. It is not necessary, because chronological approach could be there for certain if you want to write about the history of something. That's fine. But your entire review of literature need not be in that chronological manner in which it happened. So I'm just giving you an example. Look at this example. So if you have done human studies on melatonin in schizophrenia, this is one of the themes which the person has taken. But when you look at the way the paragraphs are written, it is exactly what I said you should not do, because they have all the studies which have been taken are relevant, but it has been written properly also. But what we want to know is how does this impact with what you are studying. So each of these was a paragraph about 5 to 6 lines, and each of these paragraphs was from a single reference. So this is how we don't expect it to be written. Okay. Or you have something like this and you put bullet points. This is not the place for us to be putting things in bullet points. So remember, these are some of the ways in which you should not write, even though whatever is written is perfect. Okay, but just telling this is written in their own words also, but simply giving what other people have found one after the other, is not the way to write a review of literature. The other thing which I found is you sometimes have like this. See, look at this figure. This figure is in landscape. The legend is in portrait, and then there is something written. So the title of this figure is at right angles to the figure itself. And if this figure is from a book, or if it is something which is, taken from a book, but you have actually made it in PowerPoint or something like that, then you must acknowledge the source in the footnote. Now, if you see here, there are some 1, 2, 3, 4, they have written. What are the steps? These steps, just writing here doesn't make sense. This 1, 2, 3, 4 has to be numbered here. So these are why I'm saying it is, this is, if this was written like this, that is, you put it in landscape, it doesn't matter, but have the legend below and say figure reproduced from this and give the citation under the thing. And each of these steps should be marked here. If this is 1 is somewhere here, activation, you mark that here. Number 2, what is some chemokine release, that should be marked. So every step should be marked so that it is very clear. So if a figure has been taken from a textbook, and even if you have adapted it or modified it, say that this figure has been taken from this textbook and adapted from this, and you give the reference. That is the best way to write it. What to avoid in a literature review? Too much history. Many people are on tuberculosis, they will write how mummies had tuberculosis or something like that. So there is no need. I myself know that when people write about obstructive sleep apnea, they will write in Ramayana, Kumbhakaran had obstructive sleep apnea, or Charles Dickens wrote about obstructive sleep apnea in Fat Boy Joe in Pickwick Papers and so on. So that's not necessary. Okay. So you don't have to have too much history. The other thing is lack of quality sources. See, when you are doing a literature review, you are expected to take from good journals which are of standard quality. So go to journals, scientific journals, and take from there. Please don't take from blogs or vlogs, or you find from magazines and newspaper and things like that. Then one reference, one paragraph. So one paragraph, one reference should be avoided. That I have already told you. This is very, very common in writing the review of literature. That is not the way it should be written. Each paragraph should have a theme. So if you do it the way I have told you, if you plan your review of literature the way I have told you, this will not happen. No link to the research question. Again, you're always, whatever you write, you should be linking to the research question. So you may ask me, is it wrong if we write it like this? The question is, I won't say it is entirely wrong, but the whole thing about writing a thesis is, what is scientific writing? How can you write it better? So you have to focus on that. These are all conventions which people expect you to know. And at some point of time, you will be expected to know how to write. So it is better you focus on writing it correctly now itself. So this is from one of the books. So this guy says that I agree tuberculosis was identified in Egyptian mummies, but don't you think it's a bit too much to say dinosaurs also have this? So don't overdo the history part. So what is the style? Present tense for relating to what others say, discussing theoretical concepts, methods, everything you can use present tense. But if it is some past events or some of the results of some other studies, you can use past tense. And you can, passive voice is generally used, but you can also use active voice. Nowadays, people are not that, what shall I say, rigid about active and passive voice. So that's okay. So I want to end by giving some tips to the guides. First thing is, ask the resident to start writing review of literature at the beginning of the second year. Most of the time, what happens? People wait till there is another 6 months, just about 3 months before they have to submit the thesis. people will say, now you start writing your thesis. Not necessary. After they start collecting data collection, you can start writing the review of literature. If there is some newer information, you can always add, because it takes time to write a good review of literature. And you can continue the literature search for the entire period of time. Just before the final listing also, please do a literature search. Many times you will find there would be similar articles to what you have done. And then this is another important thing. If you are going to write a review of literature, I would suggest, strongly suggest, ask your residents to print and keep a hard copy of all the references. This should be done, and they should bind it and keep. Why I am saying this is, when you are writing the discussion, it is much easier to have it on hand and look and write, or check and write. So this is very, very important. Of course, you can have a database of the references. You will be definitely using some kind of a reference manager for this, and that is fine. But you must have a hard copy. The reason is, that is the only proof a guide will have that the student has at least downloaded it and has the full text. And it is wrong. Many people try to quote from only the abstracts, which is not good. So you need to check whether the full text has been collected. The other thing is that all guides should plan routine meetings, thesis meetings with the residents, meet with them at least once a month, and keep a record of it. It should be signed off in their logbook, or whatever book they are having, which is submitted, that you have met with them every month, discuss this. If you have given some guide, the hints, tell them also that I have told him to start writing the review of literature. Next month you ask, have you written? If you have written, show me how many pages have you written. So these are some of the things which will be helpful, which don't allow the resident to start writing at the last moment when he may not find time or not be able to do a good job. So I'm concluding by saying a written review of literature helps in writing the discussion also. In the discussion, you may need to relate to background literature. So both review and literature is something like this. The review of literature actually leads in to the discussion, because from broad content, it narrows to show how the past research relates to your work. And in discussion, how the results of your study relates to the general population at large. So this will really help you, and you should start writing this as early as possible. So with that, thank you very much. I am giving my personal email here. The reason I'm giving my personal email is, if anyone wants to ask any questions which they couldn't ask during this, please send me an email and I will be happy to answer. There's absolutely no problem with that. Okay, so now I'll just stop sharing, and if you have any questions, I'll take some questions on that. Yes, please.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, good evening. Yeah.
Ma'am, I'm Dr. Mohammed Shah from pathology.
Yeah.
Actually, I would like to ask on doubt, like some theoretical data which we'll be getting from review articles. So what is your opinion on using review articles in our ROL?
Yeah, of course, use it. There is no harm in you using review articles, meta-analysis, any article you can use in your review. See, the idea is why, see, as I told you, in your, when you are writing your review of literature, you are going to have certain themes and sub-themes. So under this, any information which you want to use to help you answer, address that theme or sub-theme, you can use. No harm in using review articles. Why not?
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Any other question? Any other? Somebody wants to know, is it available on YouTube? No, not yet. It's not available on YouTube. Can this writing review of literature be used even for us who are publishing papers? See, review of literature doesn't come when you are writing in a paper, isn't it? You don't review the literature in a paper. If you are writing an original article, there is no review of literature. No, you only have introduction. Introduction and methods and results, isn't it? Results and discussion. So review of literature doesn't come into a paper. In the introduction, you might just use 1 or 2 paragraphs, which was discussed last time. So it is not useful for a paper unless you are talking of writing a narrative review, in which case it sort of has this kind of a theme. So that's the thing. Yeah. For UGs, ma'am. I don't know. Someone with Galaxy M11, can you just tell me? I don't understand what you are saying on this.
Good evening,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Yes,
I'm a UG student, ma'am, and I've been having some
Okay.
trouble trying to publish my paper. So I was wondering if I could use the same method for writing review of literature, which is actually expected in some journals.
Okay. I'm not sure. I'm not sure which journal you're talking of, because generally, if it is a journal paper, original article, you only write in the IMRAD format: introduction, materials, methods, results, and discussion. So in the introduction, you may need to write a small part where you will be talking about the background, the basic gaps in the study, and why, then the justification. So I'm not very sure which journal you are talking of. You may need, if there is a journal which asks you to write a review of literature, I don't see any reason why you can't use this method. Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. This is Dr. Shivashankari.
Yes, please. Yes, go
Ma'am,
ahead.
is there any minimum criteria that, is there any minimum criteria that this much ROL should be submitted for thesis?
This much what?
ROL.
What is
Reference, review of literature. We are quoting it, no, ma'am. Is there any
You mean
minimum
how
criteria?
many references?
Yeah.
You mean how many references? No, there is
Yeah.
there is no thing that you need to have 25 references or 50 references or whatever it is. But let me tell you, if you are citing 400 references when you are writing your review of literature, I will not believe you have read even one quarter of that. So please don't do that. Whatever reference you quote, whatever reference you cite in the review of literature, you should have read it completely. You should have read the full paper and read it completely. So I would say you can have about 50 references, should be a good number, 50 to 60, 65, depending on the kind of work which you are doing. But generally, if you say that I have only 10 references, again, it is not acceptable. So I would go for a number between 40 and 50 is a good number.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. So someone has written in a PG thesis, what is the difference between introduction and review of literature? Yeah. So last time I took a class on introduction. So introduction just introduces the whole topic. So in an introduction, you are not expected to give a detailed review of literature. In an introduction, you just talk about the main topic, then you talk a little bit about the gaps, and then lastly, you talk about the justification. So quantity wise also, the introduction will be about 2 to 3 pages, 3 pages at the most. And whereas a review of literature can be about 15 pages, 12 to 15 pages at least. So that's the length is much more in this case. Any other questions? Otherwise, shall we go on to somebody wanted to ask something, I think.
Good evening, ma'am. Myself, Dr. Rashmi Daswal, Associate Professor Academy.
Yeah.
I want to ask, is there introduction to 3 pages? What about the discussion, madam? How many pages? And the total number of pages in a PG thesis?
I'm sorry, your voice is there's a crackling noise which is coming. Can you please repeat your question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I am writing.
Okay. Any other question till Dr. Rashmi writes? Anyone else wants to ask something? Okay, otherwise have we, how many pages to be written? A discussion, I'm going to talk to you next time. We'll come to that. So under review of literature, as I said, about 15 pages, 15 to 20 pages, I think should be fine. Is it necessary to cite the references for full text only? No, please. See, the reason why we say do not cite abstracts, especially you should not be citing abstracts which are published in, in conference abstracts. If the full, because many times you don't know the details of the study. The idea is when you are citing a reference, you know the entire knowledge area which that study filled up, that gap which that study had filled up. So please, it is not a good, it's not good for you to cite from references. You must cite only for full text articles. It's not advised to cite like that. Okay.